And to lead us off, we have Probation Chief Lonnie Raymond.
Good afternoon, Board. I'll introduce right now my Assistant Chief, Jordan Anderson, my Probation Services Manager, Christine Oxford. They're here as well. What I'll be doing today is giving a brief walkthrough and overview of our budget, and I'll pause for questions after I get through that portion. I have received questions from some board members already, and so after that first little pause, I'll dive into answering some of those, call it the lightning round, and provide some brief answers to those, and that should leave us plenty of time for questions on anything and everything after that as well, any follow-ups or other questions. So, probation's budget.
Can I stop you? Are you going to do reentry and then probation, or probation and then reentry?
It's going to be both.
Okay.
So
No problem.
probation, the core budgets that we've got are 244 and 243,
Okay,
which cover probation services and reentry services.
Okay, thank you.
So this is our bottom line. Overall, we have $6.8 million in expenditures budgeted or proposed, $4.1 million in revenue, and that leaves a net county cost of $2.6 million across both of those budget units. Probation specifically, and this covers adult probation, juvenile probation. This is the 244 budget. It covers core probation services that we provide with statutory mandates, support to the court, and supervision. Total expenses for the 244 budget are just over $5 million in the proposed budget. Offsetting revenue for that's 3.5, and our net cost is 1.46, as you can see there. Included in that as well, pretrial services is one of the adult programs that we run in the adult side. That's included in that budget. Our truancy program, our agreement with the school district and our truancy officer, is also included in this budget as well. Support services, all our legal clerk staff, finance staff or analysts are included in this budget as well. The vast majority, as you can see, of this budget is staff. This is payroll, almost 50%. This is the reentry budget. This is 243. It covers detention for our youth as well as the Youth Opportunity Center. You can see the expenses 1.8 and offsetting revenue 647,000 there, and a net cost of 1.1. And again, as is the case in our 244 budget, the vast majority of those costs are staff and personnel. So this dives into a couple of the other budget and revenue lines that we have. This will answer a couple of the different questions that I've received as well. Starting with the CYA, this is a legacy budget. This has been around since the CYA days, which go back a long, long time ago. Most recently, this budget line was used for one specific youth that was detained by the court and ordered to participate in a specific program in custody. That is not funded. For all intents and purposes at this point, that youth has been released, so we're no longer utilizing that. However, there's a cost from using that budget line, essentially. So those costs that we pay the auditor, admin, things like that to maintain that and utilize those budget lines carry over a year or two after the fact. And so you see, I think it was $1,600 in that budget currently. SB 823 is attached to DJJ realignment, the subsequent entity to CYA. So DJJ realignment essentially puts all the onus and responsibility for 707B youth offenders on the counties. So for instance, if a young person is convicted of murder, it is no longer the case that we send these kids to state custody. We are responsible for housing them ourselves. So the DJJ realignment, SB 823 line, is funding that the state has allocated for Del Norte County based on our metrics. Currently, that's $250,000 every year. That's going into a fund that's set aside for those specific cases. Thankfully, we've not had any of those thus far, but that's what that money is set aside for. SB 163. This is based on an MOU For wraparound services, we participate in that along with DHHS, and so that's revenue and expenditures for us. Our staff time goes out to participate in those wraparound services. JJCPA, this is AB 1913, otherwise known as the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act. This is juvenile-related revenue that comes into the county, again, based on our county metrics. And this is tied in with the YOBG funds, Youthful Offender Block Grant. That's put together in a consolidated plan every year by the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council and submitted to the state. Those funds are then expended in line with that plan. Currently, that plan is really focused on the Youth Opportunity Center, and so the vast majority of those funds, both of those lines, JJCPA and YOBAG, are going to pay for programming and other associated costs with that Opportunity Center. SB 933, this is revenue that comes in. This is passed through DHHS to us to pay for our placement kids. So if a kid that is on probation is placed in a foster home, they're not group homes anymore, but those homes, we still have an obligation to visit, to maintain case management over those, and so the SB 933 budget, that line is to offset those costs. A couple other budget and revenue lines and things in there. AB 109, these are mostly focused on adult. AB 109 was adult realignment back in 2011. That allocation for probation comes out of our community corrections partnership plan every year. Probation is the pass-through for those funds into the county. And so you'll see a fairly significant amount of revenue coming in, but a lot of that gets passed out to the sheriff's office, to DHHS for programs and services, district attorney, public defender, all of those entities get AB 109 funds. And that's in reality just a small portion of funds that were included in adult realignment in 2011. There's more that we don't have anything to do with as well. Total dollars that we get every year is based on a state allocation and a funding formula. Typically those operate on a 3 or 5 year cycle for review. And so once that happens, state continues to calculate on a year-by-year basis what that allocation is for the county, and then the CCP plan divides that up into the different parts and pieces. MPG, mobile probation, this is a grant that we applied for and were awarded. It's a fairly small amount of money, but that you'll see that in our budget as well. That grant lasts until end of fiscal year in 27, so June of 27 is the grant life for that. We're still working on that. That's going to fund a vehicle, essentially a mobile office, and we'll be taking adult services, and as we roll that out, possibly tying in other services as well, North County and South County. So that's the goal of that MPG, and that's what those costs are associated with. CalEMA, that's state funding for felony probation. So that's coming in to assist us in ramping up our adult felony and supervision in general to try and reduce, this goes back to 2009, try and reduce the population that was going to the state in the prison system. And so that is also based on a state funding formula, and we get those numbers annually on what our allocation will be. SB 129, this is pretrial revenue. This is based on an MOU with the courts. This came up this year. As the board, you should be aware, I included you in my letters to the courts. We were able to finalize that, and we are still operating on a now 2-year MOU. And that program, SB 129, is that pretrial program, and that'll continue to be funded to varying levels, fully this year, a little bit less next year, unless the courts can find some more money. And so anything SB 129 related, that's what that is. AB 1869, the state took action and eliminated all fines and fees for adult criminal defendants and offenders. And so the 1869 is backfill revenue for that loss of fines and fees that the county was seeing. I have no idea on what the life expectancy is of that funding. It's going to depend on how the state manages its budget and when they say they won't give us any more. Some impacts on our budget. One of the biggest is typically vacancies. So we plan our budget each year for our staffing chart. Every position is that is funded, we have to budget for. So once we get to the end of the year and we have vacancies, probably the biggest impact is the lack of expenditures in that line. And so what you'll see at times is sometimes money being pulled out of payroll to pay for other things, but a lot of times that is unspent general funds as well. Detention, one of the challenges we face in budgeting is that's always based on projections. That was when we started utilizing detention contracts to begin with, and it continues to be the biggest challenge. We plan for average daily population, basically, and we live with reality. So far, we've not been bit in the butt by that, and that's turned out well. Our population that's been in custody and detained has been smaller than our projected ADP from past years. But that's one of those things that we struggle with and keep an eye on a regular basis. Last big impact on budget is state controls, whether that's mandates ordered by the state for us to do something specific, or whether that's impacts on state budget that then trickle down to us. And you see that through the 109, the 1869, 163, all of the different state-funded projects, mandates, changes. That's something that we have to live with on a year-by-year basis as well, and that has a significant impact on us. Projects and goals for us for this next year. Continued development of the Opportunity Center is a primary goal for us. It's a significant lift. I've described it multiple times as trying to push start a manual car going uphill. And if you ever have experience trying to push start a manual car, it's hard enough as it is. Trying to push one uphill, even if all the parts and pieces are there, that's a challenge. We're starting to see some movement there, so we're happy with that, and we can talk about that later. A big piece of that is capital improvements on the building, the facility. We do have funds that came in, I believe, 2 to 3 years ago, that were earmarked for juvenile institutions. That was intended on expanding program space and making it more home-like in a sense. And so as part of the whole process of closing down Juvenile Hall, proposing the Opportunity Center, we actually reached out to the state to confirm that we could still utilize those funds, and they said that we could. So those are set aside, and that will fund our capital improvement to the building to deal with doors, paint, flooring, again, make it much more conducive to having families, kids in that facility, and a little bit less like a juvenile hall. Case management system. We have been working on this project probably since 21, I think it was. And because of different staffing challenges in different departments, it's just taken quite a bit of time to get to. We are eyeball deep in that right now, utilizing the same company that the county has tapped for other systems. So we're working with Tyler Technologies. And that is a big lift, especially when we don't have a lot of people to go around and have to keep doing all the normal things. So that's one of the big projects and goals for this year, is to finally put a pin is probably a misnomer, because there's always going to be work there, but get that done and rolled out, as well as an assessment tool that goes along with that. We've been utilizing the same company for our assessment tools for adult and juvenile offenders, and we're going to be jumping to another company that a lot of northern counties in California are using. So that's a part of that rollout as well. The maintenance of our probation services and rebuilding the team. It's when you have as many vacancies as we have had and still do, that's a significant concern and goal. We are seeing an uptick in our applicants, so that's a good thing for us. We've got several people in background for DPO, and we're still running recruitments for other vacant positions as well. Mobile probation I spoke about already, and that's still on the radar. Prop 64 is another grant. We'll actually probably see little budget impact on our own budget through that, but it does take a significant amount of time to try and ramrod that project and work with our project manager and keep it pointed in the right direction. So that'll be an ongoing goal and project for us through the year. So with that overview, I'll pause. And I do have a list of questions, and I'll go into those next. But if anything comes or sparks out of what I've already said, any questions from that?
Any questions from the board?
Well, so I did pre-send my questions, but do you mind if I just ask them, or would you rather just, so then the board can hear the questions that I'm asking?
However you'd like. I do have them written down here, and I was planning on rolling into that next.
Yeah, no, I'd like to do it that way. I'd start with reentry if we could. So currently you have five positions plus one extra help position, as well as a vacant supervising DPO position. And has that been pretty fully staffed that last year? And you're anticipating that same fully staffed this next year?
Yes.
I appreciate you putting that up. Thank you. My question is that on the projected request for salaries, it's up 300,000. And so I'm just kind of curious, what do you anticipate that's going to increase that salary? Not 300,000, 100,000. What do you anticipate that extra 100,000? Did we authorize raises that I'm not aware of, or is there other things that calculate into that figure?
I think one important thing to note is you have to compare proposed budget with actual, or proposed with proposed. Comparing actual with proposed is going to take us in a wrong direction, just overall and generally.
Okay, and that's fair.
You set this up at the beginning, asking if that's going to continue to be fully staffed, if that's the anticipation. And so I'd say the answer to your question is a lot of that's outside of my control. There hasn't been any raises that you are unaware of. There were raises given as part of the restructure. And so that had a direct impact because as JCOs, we were paying them a different rate than we are as ROs. And so generally, the increase in payroll isn't necessarily of our doing or our control. That's going to be based on their salaries that have been approved by the board.
Okay, so I'm starting to learn that my understanding is that when people plug in their payroll salaries, that's a number that's given to them by the auditor's office?
Yes.
Okay. The overtime, is that the same for overtime? Because I notice that, you're right, I can't really go off the year to date, but to go 35,000 when this year to date has only been 18. Is that just because you're going to overtime, or you're going to recommend it based on what the auditor controller has given you those figures?
So no, overtime would be more our control. We're still going to base it on the salaries that we've gotten and other benefits, things like that. But overtime specifically is going to be an estimation on our part. We still have vacations, sick time, things like that we have to account for. And so we try not to go in the red on overtime. That's something that is pretty important to me.
Absolutely, and especially since you've kind of controlled the workload now, where it's could be, it's not always, but it could be a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 job. But even though you have your transports, the part-time temporary, you're requesting 20,000, and I just note that in the height of juvenile hall being fully operational, fully functioning, it was only 10,600. Is there a reason? Do you have an interest? What's happening with the part-time temporary? Do you have a special project?
So I went back and looked at previous years as well, and that number is inaccurate. What I was seeing for actuals for about a 5-year span or so was anywhere between $20,000 and $40,000 in part-time temp. We typically used those for JCO, part-time or extra help JCOs that would come in and backfill if someone was on vacation, sick, things like that. What we're utilizing that line for now, in addition to that, we do have one extra help staff that stayed on board with us and kept that essentially credential, put it that way, so that she could help out at times. But we're utilizing that to pay for program providers as well. So in trying to work with HR and figure out how best to compensate folks who are coming in to provide programs for our kids in the Opportunity Center, the most efficient way that we came up with was to bring them on as extra help employees. And so the bulk of that is intended to pay for those folks as they come in and provide programs.
Okay. It seems like that would be more contract work, but if you've worked it out with HR, that's understandable. And then my last question with regard to salaries and benefits, and then I'll pass it on, is this assigned standby for $27,000? How is that? Because even again, the year to date is $19,714. How do somebody why do we have assigned standby for just transporting them to a juvenile hall? I mean, how often are we transporting in the middle of the night to juvenile hall?
I would roughly estimate we're probably getting one after hours call to transport Adams County per month at this point.
Okay.
But that's a really rough estimate.
And so do you pay that standby fee just if they're just on call without even getting a call? They get paid for that?
Yes.
And no other department does this, so this is why I'm asking. And what's the justification for that?
I believe DHHS has on-call assigned standby as well. We're not the only department in the county that does that. We are essentially required to respond 24/7. And according to the MOU, which also dictates the rate at which I pay assigned standby, I can't call somebody back to work if they're not on assigned standby.
Okay.
Just for transport when that's something that is conceivable and reasonable to expect to happen.
The justification primarily is on the assigned standby. Is that individual is being compensated because they have the inconvenience of they can't leave town, they can't go away.
Correct.
They have to be available to respond when they are called, and it's...
Is that a percentage or is that an hourly rate? How is that calculated?
I'd have to check the MOU. I believe, well, flat rate up to a certain amount, but there's also a portion of that calculation that depends on their base pay rate, if I recall correctly as well.
Okay. The other thing is that your salary to benefit ratio is 89.5%. And I understand you probably get those calculations. I'm sure you plug those all in. But what I'm curious to know, and we got new figures. It was 91.12%, but we got new figures. So I redid that, and it's 89.5%. I do understand that your workers' comp went up about $80,000. But other than that, can you justify why it is that your benefits to salary is such a high number, high percentage?
No, I don't determine what benefits are paid the employees. I can point out that the majority of our employees are safety, and so their benefits are going to be higher than your standard employee.
Okay. Those are the questions with salary and benefits for now.
Any other questions?
I did have one based off of the presentation you gave there, Chief. You mentioned the capital improvements to the Youth Opportunity Center, and that those funds are just being held. I was just wondering where that money is. Where is it being held? Where can we see it in the budget?
Honestly, I'd have to dive back in and dig that out. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, is it listed kind of like the others are under the grant heading, possibly?
Okay.
I can chime in real quick and help you there.
Okay.
Yeah, so those funds are in the capital improvement budget. We didn't provide that budget unit because we were asked to provide general fund budgets directly. But anything the board wants, I can provide. I do want to clarify one quick thing. I don't do the probation's budget for payroll. That's done in-house. So if there's any questions, I'll happy to chime in when I can. But Christine's probably their payroll expert. And so any of these questions here, I'm sure she can answer those too.
Okay, then if So
Yeah, go ahead.
under revenue, I'm sorry, Darren, one question is the Measure R, and that's kind of coveted money. So you had originally asked for 46,000 under the reentry services, and that got increased to 111,000. At the height of your 21-22, and I know you mentioned actuals can't compare to what's projected, but it was 35,000. Can you explain, with less staff, why we're asking for $76,000 more this year for Measure R funds?
$76,000 more than actuals.
No, yeah, from the actuals from 21-22.
It's all based on our funded position.
So you have some sort of calculations, because you're asking for 111,000 in the Measure R funds. And when you were fully staffed, fully operational, it was 35,000. I'm just trying to understand the increase of $76,000 in Measure R funds. It looks like Neil can chime in.
Yeah, I can help out with that. The committee and the board recently approved a vehicle and a refrigerator freezer with Measure R funds for the Youth Opportunity Center. So that's the additional amount of money.
Perfect, thank you. I knew there was probably an explanation.
Good.
I just got a couple of real quick questions for you.
I do have more answers to
Oh,
questions.
you go right ahead.
All right. Let me.
I'll let you go first. You might
let me
answer more
rip
of my
through
questions.
these, and yeah, and I was thinking some of these might be answered out of the gate, and we've already touched on some of them, so I might have to hesitate a little bit to align my brain. So you can see our org chart up here, and there were a number of questions surrounding payroll. One was how much is paid for in 244. You'll see up there everything on the left side of your screen. So support services, and then all the staff under Supervisor Rosentrader, Supervisor Johnson. That's support services and probation services. On the right side of your screen is reentry. That's the 243 budget. So everything to the left is 244. That last little group to the right, the reentry team, that's 243. Total, that's 23 funded positions. I touched on that one already. Salaries. So a question regarding how we fund salaries. We time study, and so I'm even time studying at this point. So I think now we've gotten everybody in the department is filling out time studies. And so what we're doing is we're drawing down from different project and other revenue lines to fund specific activities rather, and this is generally, there's a couple of exceptions, rather than fully fund out of any one project code. The question was specific to 109. And when it comes to the adult side, you'll see there the majority of the officer team there is non-existent. Those are 4 vacant positions out of what should be 6. So when you have that high level of vacancies, there's just no way to fund one position to do that specific job because there's so much else that has to be done because of existing mandates. The closer we are to fully staffed, the more you'll see drawn down out of those different funding sources as that work is done based on the time studies. There was a question about reorganizing and considering a reorg of our department. We just did that, and so I'm not really keen on doing it again since we closed down a whole division and reorganized with the reentry team.
I guess I want to expand upon that question, is that it wasn't so much that to reorganize, but to rethink the operations, and not so much the operations, but the building, right? I mean, that building is costing $120,000 in utilities, $65,000 in property insurance. You reduce the maintenance structural improvements from 40 to 15, and you've said in the past, you haven't said that yet today, is how many youth are actually being served in that building. Mm-hmm. And so my question really is, are we really logically looking at that building and those expenses if we're only serving 20 youth a month? Would it make more economical sense, right? And that's what we're doing here, is trying to make sure that we are fiscally responsible. But should we consider a smaller venue for those services if we're having, just meetings. If we want to have the basketball, could we just rent out the rec gym? Those sort of things. So it wasn't that a restructuring of the actual organization as much as should we have that conversation where, the expenses to run the reentry unit in the building itself, should that be something that we talk about and perhaps come up with a smaller venue that's not as costly?
That's a very complicated question. One that we spent almost a year discussing up until last October when the board took action to close down Juvenile Hall and allow us to continue utilizing that facility for the Opportunity Center. I think it is absolutely responsible that we continue to look at what we are doing and how we are spending the money. I would argue it's a little premature when we're a little less than a year in. And like I said, pushing a car uphill trying to get it started is not an easy task. Some of the other considerations that I would urge you to think about are that building is going to cost the county whether we're there or not. My operations are going to exist whether the Opportunity Center is there or not. I still need secure space for holding and processing. I still need space for my juvenile team. I would still like space to be able to use for programs for our kids that we do have on probation, whether we're involved in working with at-risk kids or not. There are other resources and places. The rec department has access and facilities that could be used for different projects and programs. But there, again, at this point, I'm a little loath to jump back into that conversation when I don't think we've had a fair shot to make it what it can be. Part of my concern was how do we utilize the building to the fullest extent possible? I think we're doing a pretty good job right now, and I think that's just going to get better as we end up with more kids in there. That's, again, I guess I'll shut up.
I think
said my piece.
you made an important point there. We're gonna have to maintain that building no matter what. It's our ownership. We got to maintain it. There's going to be a cost for doing so, whether it's occupied or not. There's probably ways we could reduce very small increments cost associated with electricity. For the most part, in order to maintain that building in good working condition, we're going to have to continue to put money into it. I'd rather see us put money into it with bodies utilizing it as you currently have budgeted. So I appreciate that observation.
Well, and I completely do understand that reasoning. However, when we were first told about this, it was supposed to save the county, $500,000, $600,000, and it's certainly not doing that. Currently, I think the projected budget is only saving $173,000. So I think it's worthwhile to keep on the table for down in the future, but I'm hearing you loud and clear that you're not willing to have that conversation right now.
I'm willing to have it. I think this might be a hard forum to have it in when we're doing a budget workshop, and there's a lot of things to have. I would also point out there's no way that I'm only saving the county $100,000 when I went from a staff of 16 people to 6.
Well, exactly, but we didn't factor in the custody contracts, out of custody, transporting the wards, the county fuel, and all of that. So when you factor all that in, it actually is only saving us $200,000.
And I'd refer you back to my previous presentations and reports that I provided to the board. That's just not accurate.
Okay, I'm just going by the numbers.
There was a question on 243, so this is the reentry side on the right side of the screen. How many people are included in the payroll? And you can see there that number that is included in payroll, including our extra help employee. Basically, that person gets paid whenever they fill a shift and are doing work for us. That's worked out over the summer to help backfill as folks took vacation. She is employed elsewhere as well, so as the school year picks up, that availability is going to be less on her part, and the need on our part is going to be less as well. Looking at the proposed overtime budget in 243, the proposed budget is actually $5,000 less than we asked for last year. And again, I encourage the board, when you're looking at our budgets, actuals are important to determine what our future asks are, but apples to apples is important. So what is our proposed and our asked for in previous years, and what are we asking for now, and how does that relate to those actual numbers that are coming back? Are we responding to any changes, or are we not responding to changes? And that's an important question too. A lot of these we already hit. There was work comp question. I'm not sure exactly how to answer this. Yes, our costs are going up. That's based on claims. I'm not sure whether I can give numbers and things like that. That's probably an HR county council question on.
I wasn't asking for numbers. I was
Okay.
just wanting to, maybe Clint can answer this, is when we have a higher than average workers' comp, how is that calculated? Is it calculated based on the type of injury, or is it calculated based on the number of claims?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to answer it. I'm kind of where Lonnie's at. Risk management handles that for us, but it is based on the 3 or 5 prior years' actual claims. So if we have some claims along the way, they're going to add up, and then if we continue to have claims, the cost will continue to rise. However, we have situations where we don't have claims for a while, and they will come back down again. But they're a claim, they're driven by actual claims.
For 3 to 5 years?
I think it's 3 to 5.
Okay, thank you.
I can clarify that a little bit. The premium for workers' comp is based on exposure, which is your number of FTEs, and your losses. I think it's a 60-40 split, and the losses are out over 5 years. And these are still losses probably being shown from juvenile hall, actual workers and claims that were at juvenile hall.
Another question we touched on a little bit, assigned standby on call for the 243 budget. We are maintaining on call because those are our staff that are going to be doing transports if we do get an arrest. One thing to note though, when we were operating 24/7 as a juvenile hall, we didn't have a need for on call because we had staff working. And so you'll see a significant change in the budget from prior years when we were operating as a hall to now, because it just didn't exist. There was no need for it. Let's cover. That was covered as well. Couple more general questions that were sent my way. Purchases out of tactical lines. I believe this was 244 budget, but it would to some degree apply to the 243 budget as well. Some of the things that we pay for with those dollars, big one for us is our body camera system. So we run Axon body cameras. Good portion of that cost is the storage that we have. Our standard length of time that we're storing evidence that are captured by those cameras is 2 years. That's kind of an industry standard mark. And we've got that system automatically starts to purge once they hit those different marks for different categories. So we are running body cameras on transports. So whenever those occur, we've got hours and hours of video that's uploaded. Our staff in the field are using those as well. You can take pictures, different things like that. So that whole system is paid for out of the tactical lines, body cameras, and the storage and the evidence system that's attached to. Duty gear that's issued to my officers is paid for. Body armor, emergency medical equipment that is both issued to officers as well as kept in vehicles. Vehicle equipment, so oftentimes if we are putting a cage in a vehicle, we'll pull money out of the tactical lines for that as well. Radios, both for staff and for vehicles. Restraint equipment, we have purchased in the past and still maintain. It's not a regular purchase, but additional restraint equipment outside of handcuffs and shackles for transportation. Firearm maintenance, ammunition, Data Pilot was a purchase that we made several years ago. Again, not an ongoing purchase, and we have a subscription fee, but I think that's pulled out of a different line. But a purchase like that, it's a computer that'll rip cell phones. That was paid out of tactical as well. So those are some of the examples of what we pay out of those lines.
Does the state ever audit your 109 purchases?
They have not. I have not heard of them auditing any counties thus far. It's possible they could.
It's not written into the code.
No, it's not as far as I'm aware. It comes up in discussion every couple years from different points, but no county, as far as I'm aware of, has ever been audited on the 109 funds. Question about our training budget as well. Training is important. I would argue for probation officers, probation staff, at the very least, it's no less important than training offered to any other law enforcement officer. Our standards that we have to abide by are 40 years for deputy probation officer. 40 years. Thankfully, it's not that. 40 hours. 40 hours of training. I just had a mild heart attack. 40 hours of training every year for DPOs. JCOs, and we're staying with the standard for our reentry officers, 20 hours a year. So the staff that you saw, the existing staff, not the vacant positions, existing staff this upcoming year is 400 hours of certified training that we have to provide. And that's a minimum training standard. I think it's important that we provide additional training to our staff. We can include all sorts of different things in those certified training hours, but there's all sorts of different training and requirements that are asked of my officers. Placement is one specific one that comes to mind in the juvenile realm. If we have kids that are put in placement, whether that's a group home or any other foster placement, those officers that are managing those cases have to have specific training that the state requires.
If I could my question
Yes,
with
ma'am.
regard to that was that it's a total of 65,000 from a bunch of different places. So you've got your placement, you've got your AB 109, all those different things. My question is that the general fund contribution is 25,000. We're talking small amount of money in the big picture, but what I'm trying to say is that all those other revenue sources that you have itemized out, is there a way to reduce the general fund contribution, even though we're only talking 25,000, but in order to kind of put a little bit more back into the general fund, can that training be offered through all those other sources of revenue, or is it very specific that under your, AB 129, it can only be this type of training? Is that how that works?
So it's almost a yes and yes. Can we look harder at spreading? Yes. Do we already? Yes. Are those funds specifically meant to pay for certain things? Yes. And so your audit question about 109, that's the thing that always comes to mind too. I haven't seen 109, for example, audited ever. I don't know if it ever will be. But the thing that comes to mind is if somebody ever does come knocking, did we utilize those funds appropriately within the parameters that the CCP and the county determined and things like that? 129 actually is a great example because that funding is specifically meant to pay for specific training for one specific person. So our pretrial coordinator is going to go to a conference in January, I believe. And so our budget this year out of that line is meant to pay for her training for that specific position. And so things like that we can't really dip into. That's not the intent. Other funding sources are a little more flexible. 109 is more flexible. JJCPA YOBAG could be. But again, you have adult-specific funding over here, juvenile-specific funding over here. Trying to stay within bounds reasonably is the goal. And at the same time, the county has an obligation to provide probation services. And so I don't know what the perfect formula is or how to parse that. But spreading it, I think, is important. I'm not going to argue that we can look at it and continue to look at it because one, it's important. Two, it's a significant cost. Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, $25,000 out of $6 million budget isn't a whole lot to shout at, but still, it's a good chunk. Would I like to reduce it? No. We spent a good portion of our general fund training this last year, trying to bring in training both for our staff and others that specifically surrounded mental health and officer wellness this time around.
I just didn't want you to think that I was questioning that you don't need the training.
Right.
I fully support that. I'm just
Right.
trying to say, where can we penny pinch for the general fund dollars? Because that seems to be what we lack the most of. You've answered the question, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. Regarding 243, there was a question on how we calculate our detention cost. This was based on an average daily population over, I think, a 3-year span, and a daily bed rate that we were looking at from Humboldt County, Shasta County. They each have a slightly different bed rate, and we continue to have to work with those counties as they make any adjustments. But our detention cost is the ADP times those bed rates, and that's how we come up with that dollar figure for our contracts. Refrigerator, this goes back to the Opportunity Center and the request for a refrigerator. As a juvenile hall, we have a walk-in, and that was built in as part of the facility, so we have a walk-in fridge and freezer. Our desire would actually be to shut those down. That's one of Jordan's projects on his radar for this coming year, is to figure out how to appropriately shut those down in full so we're not expending utilities on running those when we don't have a need. Our reach-in fridge, which we had for years, died. Building maintenance tried to figure out how to revive that, didn't work. But at the end of the day, we're still running an opportunity center with kids in there, and food is kind of a big thing for kids. Our detention side, we still offer food for our kids that are in detention, whether we're bringing them back and forth or whether they've just been arrested. So having access to some kind of cold storage is important for us to have. And so that's where the nature of the request came from this year for the funds to purchase a fridge.
I appreciate that. I asked that question. I guess what I was getting at is, how much are we going to be utilizing a kitchen?
Yeah.
In the back of my head, I was thinking that we weren't at all.
Mm-hmm.
But, bringing that up, that we do occasionally house youth that get arrested prior to them being transported to Humboldt County. It totally makes sense. So I just wanted to ask that question, kind of what the long-term plan is. It's good to hear, that we're going to work on shutting down the big walk-in refrigerator freezer. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you.
And I'll just throw this out too. Jordan and his team have been working to find somebody to come in and do a cooking class as well, because one of the programs that we'd love to run is teach kids how to cook. And they've talked to Community Food Council about working in our garden, and that tied into that conversation as well. And so we're hoping that this year we will be able to get a cooking program up and running for those kids that are involved too. So we'll be not just utilizing a fridge, but actually utilizing the whole kitchen. Serve Safe has always been something that we do, and so we'll tie all that in as well. Another question regarding fuel costs, vehicles. We currently have 15 vehicles. 3 of those are at end of life, and so we'll be working on surplusing those. All our staff are driving vehicles at some point or another. Some typically on the adult side that work at the courthouse office. They're assigned vehicles, so they don't have to come to work and try and find one that's available. The rest are left at the Juvenile Services Building Opportunity Center, and juvenile officers are using those. Opportunity Center staff, the reentry officers, are using those, not just for transports, but they're actually, kind of transports, I guess. They're picking kids up, bringing them to the facility for programs, taking them home, and we would expect that continues and grows too. A lot of the kids that we're talking to, families that we're talking to, have transportation as one of their primary challenges. This year, fuel costs is something that, especially running an institution, because we were running propane, electrical, water, utilities were, and I'll include fuel in that, were always a big consideration as we go through the budget process. This year, we decreased the general fund portion of that, I think by a couple $1,000s. I want to say $5, but I could be thinking of something else. And similar to other things, we try and spread those costs for fuel out among the different budget and project lines. So if it's a car that was purchased using JJCPA or YOBAG funds, so juvenile programs, we'll try and budget that fuel or expend the fuel budget out of that line for that vehicle and those services. So that all that gets spread as well.
I just asked that question about the fuel because it seemed like $20,650 was quite a bit of fuel. Breaking it down onto what mileage that was, it was quite a few miles. So I was just wanting some clarification as to that. Just seemed like an awful lot of time in vehicles. And I didn't know how many transports we were doing back and forth to Eureka, but it was like a trip to Eureka back and forth almost every work day of the year. So it just seemed like an awful lot in the fuel line, and kind of along the same idea that Supervisor Starkey was talking about, trying to pencil those pennies for the general fund is kind of what we're looking at, trying not to over budget. And so thank you for explaining that for me. Appreciate it.
And our costs, again, group home, foster placements, if it's out of county, we're using fuel to do those visits as well. So that's another thing that we're spending money on, and we do spend quite a bit of time on the road.
How many current youth do you have out of county?
We're still visiting our NMDs as well, our non-minor dependents. I think we've got 2 that we're going out of county every month. In addition to any kids that we have in detention, our
You have
staff.
to do if they're in detention in Shasta County, you still have to follow those same once a month rules that you have to go visit them.
It's not required because they're in detention, but as a matter of practice, that's what we've been doing since we started housing out of county. So
Okay.
in a sense, we're treating them similar to foster placements, and so we're still doing those once a month visits, even with those kids in custody.
When I was a placement officer, I would just do the loop.
Yeah.
So is that what you guys are kind of trying to do as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I hit most things in a little bit of a lightning round. So other questions that you have?
I got one question for you, which is under your 244 budget, under special department expenses, Prop 64, there was a $120,000 increase in that ask for this year. What's it wrapped up in that?
So the Prop 64 will be tied to that grant, that specific grant.
Right.
We're going to be moving funds as our project manager has done different things. We have a youth advisory board. They're getting stipends. She's getting paid. We have CCRP, which is our local evaluator. They have a contract as well. And so different expenditures are going to flow through us out to those different parts and pieces for that grant.
Okay, appreciate it.
When are we going to get a presentation on that?
Hopefully soon. I've been working with my project manager and trying to nail down that preliminary report because there's been some hiccups in that.
All right. I think Supervisor had some questions and I have some.
Do you have additional? I'm just trying to understand the process that you go through to get us a draft budget in June. Now, when do your meetings start with our budget team?
Budget team meetings are starting in April, May.
And how many do you have before the draft budget is submitted?
Really depends on the year. Sometimes it's one and we pull it off. Sometimes there's multiple.
And how long do those meetings take?
Several hours out, and that's after we have our internal meetings because we have to create our budget and submit it before the budget team ever sees it. And so we're spending hours and hours to put together those annual budgets right after mid-years, by the way.
And
Budget season never
who's your
ends. The 3 of us sitting here. So myself, Jordan has always been involved. He was administrator for the juvenile hall, or manager. So juvenile hall 243 budget. That was his thing, and so he's well familiar with that and has stayed in the mix of things. Christine has been doing finance for a long time.
And does the board's budget team, when they conduct these processes with you leading up to June, are they asking you similar type questions?
Yes. Yeah, typically we're going line by line when we sit down and go through a meeting, and we've got follow-up homework that we have to come back with. Sometimes we're a little more timely about that than others, but yeah, there's always follow-up and things that need to be cleaned up.
Okay, thank you.
So we have just a couple more minutes on for you. How many people or adults are on probation on average this last year? I mean, I believe that we should have some statistical information so we can kind of look at that. Just how many people are being served by this on average?
So looking at adult numbers in the last fiscal year, we had 413 individuals on supervision, plus another 49 on pretrial supervision. Total was 462. On average, again, both probation and pretrial supervision, 369 any given month.
Okay. Do you track recidivism rates?
We are not. We're struggling with that. So
Yeah, it's hard.
This goes back several years, but our analyst actually was working with DOJ to try and pull down data, because to get any good recidivism data, we need DOJ data. So he's worked with DOJ and IT, and we hit some roadblocks. We're going to try and do internal local with jail data and court data to at least have some kind of starting point, and
Right.
keep trying to knock down the
Yeah.
state number.
Because we definitely want to see some success rates, right? And I'm sure you have successful terminations. And then how many pre-sentence reports did you write this last year?
PSI is 184.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That doesn't include post-sentence reports, which we get on a regular basis out of Pelican Bay cases, supplemental reports, and other filings.
Yeah, when I worked there, how many did I write to get caught up? Are we caught up still?
We're not caught
Okay.
up still. With only 2 officers, we're
Yeah.
struggling.
No, totally understand. And then just juvenile probations, roughly how many are on juvenile probation, not actually in custody, but just on wardship or?
Currently, we've got 18. So 3 of those, 18. 3 of those are non-minor dependents. So they've chosen to continue services after they reach the age of 18. They're not on supervision anymore, but we still have some case management responsibilities for them.
Do we get funding for that?
I believe we do draw down some juvenile funding. I don't remember which lines they are. 4E? Yeah, it's
Okay.
4E funding.
All right, thank you.
And just for a moment of clarification, because it just got passed over real quick, and that is the AB 109. There is a committee that oversees and sets the actual spending to be adapted, and that is held by the courts, yourself, sheriff's office, city police, plus several other organizations.
Correct.
PD's office has a representative there. So it's oversight, and then that budget is set, and then the monies go out.
Yeah, the plan actually does come to the board every year for approval.
Right.
So that's something on my to-do list in the next month and a half, is finalize that plan for this year. I don't foresee we'll see significant changes at all this coming year.
But they've never audited it in all the time that it's existed, it was pacification money anyway, so. Appreciate your
I
opportunity.
mean,
and
that's
time.
rare though for the state not to want to know exactly where
Oh.
every single dollar's going.
They were just
so that's
giving
why
it-
I asked.
They were
It's
just giving it as a go away.
Yeah, go
Have
away
nice.
for sure.
Thank you. You are released.
Chair Wilson, just you need to take public comment.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Is there any public comment on the presentation given by Probation Department? You are correct. Seeing no public comment. Thank you.